Alright, so this is the Mech 140 MazeBot report portion of the project. Ultimately, when programming, I had a total of 3 sketches. The first 2, the one that you see now was my first idea with the push button. This was comprised of a lot of if statements when the push button was high and when the push button was high. Multiple if statements that had different commands when the push button was being pressed, and then my else if statement, which is like, which was supposed to do my push button backward. What the problem was with this first sketch is that it wasn't exactly concise with the push button. Like here I have if push button high, I have a different set of commands as opposed to a set of commands here. Like these two are entirely different, and it wasn't exactly turning out how I wanted it to in testing my MazeBot. In my second sketch here, I had my first sketch as a reference, and I was tinkering around with motor speeds, delay times, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't work, knowing what values to use when I had Malori turning left, right, backward, forward, the proper delay times in order to execute those commands, and so on and so forth. And all this code that you see coded out here was me trying to figure out a way to make those if statements a little more concise. And ultimately, in order to do that, I settled for my final sketch, which had a bump count, which helped fix my problem on having more concise commands at certain times. Like for example, on my first one, I had an if statement with a set of commands that executed when my bumper switch was pressed one time, and it would execute these and if it wasn't being executed, and I would have my while loop making it go forward, and then when it was pushed a second time, I have another set of commands for it to be executed, and then when that was completed, it would just go back into my while loop for it to go forward. And this was a bit of a repetitive process, since there are mainly only right turns in the maze as opposed to that first left turn. And I got to the point where at the very end I would have her hit that final right turn, have her stop, back up, spin 180 degrees, and have her stop again. And then over here I took some notes in regards to how I wanted my MazeBot to be acting. One of the bigger challenges I was facing in doing this project was not breaking down exactly, not being specific enough in what I wanted her to do. Like at the beginning, I jumped right in and was like, okay, I'm gonna have her hit this point, then she's gonna turn left, then she's gonna hit here, and then she's gonna go forward and hit there. I needed to be a little more concise with what I wanted her to do, which ultimately led to a better sketch design in my program. And in order for me to do this, I wrote down a couple steps. Excuse me. I wrote down a couple steps in what I wanted her to do in each part of the maze. Like for example, step 1, I wanted her to go forward, and then the second part of that, she would back up and then turn 90 degrees left and then go forward again. And this was a bit of a more repetitive process. Each of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s was the exact points in the maze where her push buttons would be hit, and then the different set of commands would be executed in depending on how many times the push button had been pushed at that time. In this piece of paper, at the beginning I was testing her motor speeds. I wrote down a couple of things in which would make her go full forward, some of her turning speeds, To help me visualize how the motors functioned, I wrote a number line down in regards to my left and my right so I get a better idea of the range of values, and putting it together with my motor, if that makes a little sense. Up here, I have notes for Malori. I would write these down in testing. Like sometimes I would test her and then I would write down notes of what she would be doing. Like up here she would go forward, then she would back up 90 degrees, and then I put a question mark here because she backed up again, and that's when I stopped. And then I went to go edit her programming, fixed her up a little bit, and tried again. I had some ideas and some suggestions. I had to be careful of doing the 0 to 180 range as per recommendation of my tutor. I had tutoring advice, or I went to a tutor in order to get, I guess, a push in the correct direction. And it was he who actually suggested the push button count and the commands that would go along with each push button count. In order to do that, I thought I needed to do a for loop. I thought the for loop would help execute the idea that I had in mind, but it didn't quite work out the way that it did. Instead, I used a bump count, which was way easier than trying to figure out a for loop, especially if I were to have a for loop during my while loop. It was a little confusing. So I had some ideas for my for loop while before I changed my mind to the bump count idea. And yeah, that's pretty much it.